Months had passed since Daisy first started digging that fateful hole in Walter's backyard. The neighborhood wasn't the same place it used to be. What had once been a quiet, rule-bound community now buzzed with life and connection. People who barely spoke before were sharing meals, exchanging stories, and working together on projects they never imagined possible. And at the heart of it all was a pig whose curiosity had unlocked something far greater than anyone expected. Artifacts Daisy uncovered weren't just relics of the past. They became symbols of unity for the present. A plaque was installed near Walter's front yard to commemorate the original family who had lived there. It read, **, in memory of those who came before us, leaving behind pieces of their lives so we may remember. Beside it, a small garden flourished, planted by neighbors as a tribute to Daisy and her role in bringing everyone closer. Sunflowers stood tall alongside marigolds, and a tiny wooden sign declared it Daisy's Discovery Garden. Even the HOA meetings felt different now. Gone were the days of nitpicking over minor infractions like mismatched curtains or slightly uneven hedges. Instead, discussions revolved around ways to celebrate the neighborhood's newfound spirit. They organized monthly potlucks where residents brought dishes inspired by recipes from the early 1900s, tying the food back to the era of the original homeowners. Someone even suggested starting a time capsule project, encouraging families to contribute items that represented their modern lives. The idea was to bury it somewhere safe, just like the original owners had done, creating a link between generations. Walter, too, had changed. He no longer kept to himself as much as he used to. His weekends were filled with visits from neighbors, eager to learn more about history or simply spend time with Daisy. Kids loved coming over to watch her dig under strict supervision, of course, and adults appreciated the chance to chat with Walter about his research. He'd always been passionate about uncovering stories from the past. But now he realized how much joy it brought others when he shared what he'd learned. One evening, during one of his regular backyard gatherings, a young boy raised his hand. Shyly, Walter smiled and nodded, inviting him to speak. "Do you think Daisy will find anything else?" the boy asked, his eyes wide with wonder. Walter chuckled. "Well, she's still digging every day, so who knows? Maybe there's more out there waiting to be discovered." The crowd laughed, but the question lingered. It wasn't just the boy who wondered, it was everyone. Over time, Daisy had dug up several smaller objects, though none quite as significant as the metal box. Still, her persistence kept hope alive. Every time she rooted around a new patch of soil, people couldn't help but gather to see if she'd struck gold again. One crisp autumn morning, Daisy made headlines once more. This time, it wasn't because of a major discovery, but because of an unexpected twist. Walter noticed her circling a spot near the edge of his property, a spot he hadn't seen her focus on before. Curious, he grabbed a shovel and joined her. Within minutes, they unearthed another object, a rusted key dot. At first glance, it seemed insignificant. Just an old key, probably useless after decades underground. But when Walter cleaned it off and examined it closely, he noticed faint engravings along its side. It looked like part of an address, numbers worn down but still legible. Excited whispers rippled through the small group of neighbors who had gathered to watch. Could this key belong to a lock somewhere nearby? Or perhaps it opened a door to yet another chapter of the neighborhood's history? No one knew for sure, but the mystery reignited everyone's enthusiasm. Ruth, the older woman who had revealed her family's potential connection to the original homeowners, offered to help investigate. She scoured old maps and records, searching for any mention of a matching address. Others pitched in, combing through archives or knocking on doors to ask longtime residents if they remembered anything unusual about locks or hidden compartments in their homes. Weeks turned into months, and while the key remained a tantalizing clue, its purpose stayed. elusive. But that didn't dampen anyone's spirits. If anything, it reminded them that the journey itself was worth celebrating. The process of working together, sharing ideas, and staying curious brought the community even closer. By spring, the neighborhood had transformed entirely. Lawns still looked neat, but now they featured personalized touches, wind chimes, painted rocks, and flower beds designed collaboratively by neighbors. Kids played freely in the streets, knowing adults would keep an eye out for them. Strangers passing through often remarked on how warm and welcoming the area felt. It was clear that something special had taken root here, and it all started with a pig and a hole in the ground. For Walter, the experience taught him that life is full of surprises. He'd moved to this neighborhood expecting peace and solitude, only to find himself at the center of a vibrant, interconnected world. He credited Daisy for much of it, of course, but he also acknowledged the openness and kindness of his neighbors. Without their willingness to embrace the unexpected, none of this would have happened. As for Daisy, she continued doing what she did best: digging, sniffing, and charming everyone she met. Her Instagram following reached tens of thousands, and fans from around the globe sent letters, gifts, and even custom-made outfits for her to wear. She became a local icon, featured in school projects, newspaper articles, and even a children's book titled Daisy the Detective, A Pig's Tale of Hidden Treasures. But perhaps the greatest legacy of all was the lesson the neighborhood learned. Rules are important, yes, but sometimes bending them or breaking them altogether can lead to extraordinary outcomes. By letting go of rigid expectations and embracing curiosity, they had discovered not just artifacts, but a deeper sense of belonging. On a sunny Saturday afternoon, nearly a year after Daisy's initial discovery, the neighborhood held a grand celebration. Tables lined the street, laden with food, drinks, and handmade crafts. There were games for kids, live music performed by local talent, and speeches from residents reflecting on how far they'd come. At the center of it all stood Walter and Daisy, surrounded by smiling faces. Someone handed Walter a microphone, urging him to say a few words. He hesitated for a moment, then stepped forward. "I never expected any of this," he began, looking out at the sea of familiar faces. "When I moved here, I thought I'd spend my days quietly reading books and taking care of my pigs. But Daisy had other plans. She showed us that sometimes the most ordinary things like dirt and roots can lead to the most extraordinary discoveries." He paused, glancing down at Daisy, who snorted happily as if agreeing with him. "What we found wasn't just treasure buried underground. We found connections with each other, with our past, and with ourselves. And for that, I'm grateful." The crowd erupted into applause, cheering not just for Walter and Daisy, but for everything they'd built together. As the festivities carried on late into the evening, one thing was certain: this neighborhood would never forget the pig who dug her way into their hearts and their history. And so, life went on. The hole in Walter's backyard eventually filled in, replaced by fresh grass and flowers. But the memories it uncovered and the bonds it forged would last forever. The buzz around Walter's house didn't die down anytime soon. In fact, it only grew louder as weeks turned into months. The event hosted by the HOA had been such a success that people were still talking about it. Neighbors who once barely knew each other now exchanged greetings and shared stories about their own families' histories. Kids played together in the cul-de-sac, laughing and racing toy cars, while parents chatted over cups of coffee or lemonade. The neighborhood felt different, warmer, friendlier, more alive. Daisy, of course, remained the star of the show. Her Instagram fame skyrocketed, with followers from all over the world tuning in for updates on her daily adventures. Walter's niece, who managed the account, posted photos and videos almost every day. There was Daisy lounging in the sun, Daisy sniffing out patches of dirt, and even Daisy wearing tiny flower crowns made by local kids. One video showed her attempting to dig into a sandpit at the park during a community outing. It got thousands of likes and comments like, "She's officially my spirit animal," and "Can I hire her to find buried treasure in my backyard?" But Daisy wasn't just a social media sensation anymore. She had become a symbol of something bigger, a bridge between the past and the present, and a reminder of how curiosity can lead to unexpected discoveries. People started visiting Walter's house regularly, not just to see Daisy, but also to learn more about the artifacts she'd uncovered. Walter welcomed them warmly, always happy to share what he'd learned about the original family who had lived there. He began hosting small gatherings in his backyard every weekend. He called them history chats, where neighbors could sit together, sip tea, and listen to stories about the area's past. Sometimes local historians joined in, bringing additional insights or sharing tales of other neighborhoods with similar hidden treasures. These sessions weren't formal lectures. They were casual conversations filled with laughter, questions, and plenty of nods of agreement. Even those who weren't particularly interested in history found themselves drawn in by the charm of it. All one Saturday afternoon, during one of these chats, an older woman named Ruth stood up and cleared her throat. Everyone turned to look at her, surprised because Ruth rarely spoke up. She lived 2 doors down from Walter and was known for keeping to herself. But today, she seemed eager to say something. "I remember hearing about this place when I was younger," Ruth began, her voice soft but steady. "My grandmother used to tell me stories about the family who lived here back in the day. They were kind people, hardworking, generous. When times got tough, they helped others in the neighborhood. I think they might have been related to us somehow." Her words sparked a flurry of questions. Walter leaned forward, intrigued. "Do you know anything else about them?" he asked. Ruth hesitated, then nodded. "Not much. Just bits and pieces. My grandmother mentioned that they left suddenly, maybe because of financial trouble or illness. After that, no one really heard from them again." This revelation sent shivers through the group. Could Ruth's family be connected to the people whose belongings Daisy had unearthed? Walter promised to look into it further, combing through old records and documents to see if there was any link. Meanwhile, Ruth volunteered to search through her attic, hoping to find letters or photographs that might shed more light on the mystery. As the weeks went by, the neighborhood became obsessed with piecing together the puzzle. Kids drew pictures of what they imagined the original family looked like based on the faded photograph Walter had shown them. Some even created fictional stories about why they had buried their treasures. Adults joined in too, organizing trips to the local library or historical society to dig deeper into archives. What had started as a quirky pig's hobby had turned into a full-blown community project. Even the HOA got involved. They decided to dedicate a corner of the community center to preserving the artifacts and displaying educational materials about the neighborhood's history. Volunteers worked tirelessly to set up exhibits featuring replicas of the items Daisy had found, along with explanations of their significance. There was even a life-size cutout of Daisy wearing her chief archaeologist sign, complete with a speech bubble that read, "Keep digging for answers." The transformation in the HOA itself was remarkable. Before Daisy came along, they had been strict enforcers of rules, often criticized for being overly rigid. Now, they were seen as collaborators, working alongside residents to foster a sense of unity and pride. Their meetings, which used to focus solely on complaints about overgrown lawns or noisy parties, now included discussions about upcoming events, preservation efforts, and ways to engage younger generations in learning about their roots. Walter noticed the change most of all. Where he had once felt like an outsider, he now felt like part of the fabric of the community. People invited him to barbecues, book clubs, and holiday parties. He even agreed to judge the annual Halloween costume contest, though he insisted Daisy should wear her flower crown for the occasion. His quiet, solitary life had expanded in ways he never anticipated. And he couldn't have been happier. For Daisy, life continued much as it always had, with one exception. Instead of facing disapproving stares or muttered complaints, she now received pats on the head and treats whenever she wandered near the fence line. Neighbors encouraged her to keep digging, hoping she might uncover more secrets. Walter kept a close eye on her activities, ensuring she stayed safe and didn't accidentally damage utility lines or pipes. Still, not everything was perfect. A few grumbles could still be heard here and there. One neighbor complained that all the attention on Daisy made her feel left out since she only had a cat. Another griped that the constant influx of visitors parking on the street sometimes blocked driveways. But these voices were rare and largely ignored, drowned out by the overwhelming positivity that had taken hold of the neighborhood. What struck everyone most was how much had changed, not just in terms of physical improvements or newfound knowledge, but in the way people treated each other. Conversations flowed more easily. Smiles came more naturally. Strangers became acquaintances, and acquaintances became friends. All because of a pig and a hole in the ground. And yet, despite all the progress, one question lingered in everyone's minds. Was there more to discover? Had Daisy truly uncovered everything, or were there still secrets waiting beneath the surface? Only time and perhaps Daisy's keen sense of smell would tell. The discovery of the metal box and its contents didn't just stay within Walter's backyard. Word spread like wildfire through the neighborhood, and by the next morning, it seemed like everyone had heard about Daisy's incredible find. People who hadn't even been there that day were talking about it over coffee, sharing theories and speculating about what else might be hidden beneath the ground. Some joked that Daisy should get her own detective badge, while others, half seriously, suggested she might have a sixth sense for buried treasure. Local historians and archaeologists soon caught wind of the story. One of them, an older gentleman with a passion for preserving the past, showed up at Walter's door unannounced. He introduced himself as someone who had spent years studying the history of the area. When Walter invited him inside and showed him the artifacts, the man's eyes lit up with excitement. "This is remarkable," he said, carefully examining each item. "These objects could tell us so much about how people lived back then." He explained that many families in the early 1900s buried personal belongings during times of uncertainty, wars, economic hardship, or natural disasters. It was a way to protect their most cherished possessions, hoping they'd one day return to retrieve them. Sometimes, though, life took unexpected turns, and those treasures remained forgotten underground. The fact that Daisy had uncovered such a trove was nothing short of extraordinary. News outlets picked up the story, too. Reporters arrived with cameras and microphones, eager to interview Walter and, of course, Daisy. The pig became an instant celebrity. Photos of her digging in the yard went viral online, accompanied by headlines like "Pig Uncovers Hidden History" and "Daisy, the Backyard Archaeologist." Walter's teenage niece, who loved social media, decided to create an Instagram account for Daisy. Within days, it blew up, attracting followers from all over the world. People posted comments praising her skills, sharing memes, and even asking if she offered digging lessons. But not everyone was thrilled about the sudden attention. A few neighbors grumbled about the disruption caused by reporters parking on their streets and strangers stopping by to gawk at Walter's house. One woman complained that the constant foot traffic was making it hard to keep her lawn pristine. Another muttered under her breath about how all this fuss over a pig was ridiculous. Still, these voices were drowned out by the majority, who found themselves captivated by the unfolding events. What surprised everyone, even Walter, was how quickly the HOA's attitude shifted. At first, they had been determined to shut down Daisy's digging operation. Now, they saw an opportunity. This wasn't just a quirky story anymore. It was a chance to bring the community together. They proposed hosting a special event to celebrate the historical discovery, inviting residents and visitors alike to learn more about the neighborhood's past. Funds raised from ticket sales would go toward preserving the artifacts and educating people about local history. Walter agreed to the idea, seeing it as a way to honor the original family who had once called his house home. He worked closely with the historians and archaeologists to organize exhibits showcasing the items Daisy had uncovered. Old photographs, letters, and personal belongings were displayed alongside information about the era in which they were created. There were also interactive stations where kids could try their hand at mock excavations, using toy shovels and brushes to uncover replica artifacts buried in sandboxes. Daisy naturally played a starring role in the event. She appeared in a makeshift pen decorated with flower garlands, happily munching on treats while visitors lined up to take selfies with her. Kids adored her, and adults couldn't resist smiling at her antics. Someone even made a small sign that read "Chief Archaeologist" and hung it around her neck. Walter stood nearby, answering questions and sharing stories about the house's history. He talked about the original owners, their dreams, struggles, and eventual departure, and how Daisy had helped to reconnect the present with the past. The event drew crowds far beyond what anyone had expected. Families came from neighboring towns, curious to see the famous pig and learn about the artifacts. Local businesses benefited too, as visitors stopped by cafes and shops before or after attending the exhibit. For the first time in years, the neighborhood felt vibrant and alive, buzzing with energy and shared purpose. Even the skeptics softened their stance. The woman who had complained about foot traffic admitted that the event brought a nice change of pace to the otherwise quiet street. Others who had initially dismissed Daisy's digging as a nuisance now spoke proudly of having a history-making pig in their midst. Neighbors who rarely interacted began chatting more often, bonding over their newfound appreciation for the area's rich past. As the days turned into weeks, the initial excitement began to settle, but the impact lingered. The artifacts were carefully cataloged and stored, with plans to display them permanently at a local museum. Daisy returned to her usual routine of digging in the yard, though now she did so under the watchful eyes of both Walter and curious onlookers. Her Instagram account continued to grow, with fans eagerly awaiting updates on her latest discoveries. For Walter, the experience was transformative. He had always been a private person, content to live quietly with his pigs and his books. But now he found himself enjoying the connections he'd formed with his neighbors. People waved to him when he walked Daisy, on a leash of course, and some even stopped by to chat. He realized that the hole Daisy had dug hadn't just uncovered relics from the past. It had unearthed something equally valuable, a sense of community. And as for the HOA, they learned a valuable lesson too. Rules and regulations were important, sure, but sometimes bending them, or even breaking them, could lead to something extraordinary. What started as a conflict over a patch of dirt had blossomed into a celebration of history, curiosity, and human connection. In the end, everyone agreed on one thing: Daisy wasn't just a pig. She was a reminder that life is full of surprises, and sometimes the best stories are the ones you least expect. The backyard fell silent as Walter held up the rusted metal box. It was small, no bigger than a shoebox, but its appearance carried an air of mystery that made everyone forget why they were even there in the first place. The officers exchanged glances, unsure what to say. One of them scratched his head, while another leaned closer, trying to get a better look. Even the HOA members, who had come ready to lecture Walter about neighborhood rules, seemed frozen in place. Walter didn't.
Rush?
He knew how to build suspense, whether he meant to or not. Slowly, almost ceremoniously, he brushed off more dirt from the surface of the box. His hands moved with care, like he was handling something fragile and precious. Then, without saying a word, he flipped open the lid dot inside. The group saw stacks of old papers, yellowed with age and brittle at the edges. There were also a few pieces of tarnished jewelry, a ring, a brooch, and a locket, and some coins that looked ancient. Some of the items bore dates going back decades, while others carried symbols and insignias no one recognized. It wasn't just random junk. These were artifacts, relics from another time. "This is unbelievable," one of the officers finally said, breaking the silence. He crouched down next to Walter, inspecting the contents more closely. Where did this come from? Walter smiled faintly, clearly enjoying the moment. "It's been here all along," he replied. "Buried under our feet for years, maybe even decades." He went on to explain that he'd suspected something like this might exist ever since he moved into the house. Before buying the property, he'd done some research on its history. The original owners, a family who lived there in the early 1900s, had left behind letters and photographs hinting at buried keepsakes. At the time, Walter thought it was just a fun little detail about the house's past. But when Daisy started obsessively digging in that one spot, he couldn't help but wonder if she'd stumbled onto something real. "She's got a nose for these things," Walter added, patting Daisy affectionately on the back. The pig snorted, happily, oblivious to the drama unfolding around her. Pigs are naturally curious animals. They can sense changes in the soil things we wouldn't notice. I figured, why not let her explore? As Walter spoke, the crowd began to loosen up. The tension that had filled the air just moments earlier melted away, replaced by curiosity and awe. One of the HOA members stepped forward, peering into the box. "So, you're telling us your pig found treasure?" she asked, her voice tinged with disbelief. "Not exactly treasure," Walter corrected gently. "More like memories. Pieces of the past. These belong to the people who used to live here. Letters, photos, personal belongings, they tell a story." To prove his point, Walter pulled out a faded photograph from the pile. In it, a young family stood together in front of the very same house where they now stood. A man, a woman, and two children smiled brightly, their faces glowing with happiness. Behind them, the house looked much the same as it did today, though slightly less modernized. Walter pointed to the image. "This is them, the original owners." Their names were written on the back of the photo, along with the year it was taken, 1923. HOA members glanced at each other, their expression shifting from skepticism to fascination. Someone muttered, "I had no idea this house was so old." Another chimed in, "Do you think there's more down there?" Walter shrugged. "Possibly. We won't know until we dig deeper. But Daisy seems pretty convinced there's something worth finding." At this, a ripple of laughter passed through the group. For the first time since arriving, the atmosphere felt lighter. Even the officers, who had come prepared to issue warnings or citations, seemed charmed by the unexpected turn of events. One of them joked, "Well, I guess we can't arrest a pig for being a detective." The comment broke the ice completely. Neighbors who had been peeking through their windows earlier now ventured outside, drawn by the commotion. Soon, Walter's backyard was filled with curious onlookers, all eager to catch a glimpse of the mysterious box and hear Walter's story. Some brought chairs, others snacks, and before long, what had started as a confrontation turned into an impromptu gathering as the sun dipped lower in the sky, casting golden light over the scene. Walter continued sharing bits and pieces of what he'd learned about the house's history. He talked about the family in the photograph, their joys, struggles, and eventual move away from the neighborhood. He speculated about why they might have buried these items, suggesting it could have been a way to preserve their legacy during uncertain times. But the real star of the show remained Daisy. She basked in the attention, happily munching on snacks offered by admiring neighbors. Kids giggled as they petted her soft ears, and adults marveled at her uncanny ability to uncover hidden secrets. By the end of the evening, she had gone from being labeled a nuisance to becoming a local hero. Still, questions lingered. What else lay buried beneath the ground? How significant were these artifacts, really? And most importantly, what would happen next? No one had answers yet, but one thing was clear. Walter and Daisy had sparked something special. What began as a conflict over a hole in the yard had blossomed into a shared sense of wonder and discovery. For the first time in years, the neighborhood felt alive, not just with gossip or complaints, but with genuine connection. And as the crowd slowly dispersed, heading back to their homes, many couldn't help but wonder what other secrets might be hiding right under their noses. Asterisk. In a quiet little neighborhood where everything looked picture perfect, life moved along like clockwork. The lawns were always trimmed to perfection, the sidewalks sparkled clean, and every house seemed to follow an unspoken rulebook of neatness. This was a place governed by the Homeowners Association, or HOA for short, a group of neighbors who took pride in keeping things tidy and orderly. But all of that changed one day when someone new moved into the area. This newcomer wasn't your typical suburban resident. He was an older man with a kind face, soft-spoken but clearly different from everyone else around him. Let's call him Walter. Walter didn't care much for fancy cars or expensive decorations. Instead, he brought something unusual with him: pigs. Yes, you heard that right. Pigs. Not just any pigs, though. These weren't farm animals meant for food or labor. To Walter, they were pets. And among them, there was one pig that stood out more than the others. Daisy. Daisy was no ordinary pig. She had personality. If you ever saw her waddling around Walter's backyard, you'd swear she had a mission. Her favorite activity? Digging. Now, most people might find it odd for a pig to dig holes in the ground, but to Walter, it was perfectly normal. After all, pigs are naturally curious creatures. They love rooting around in dirt. It's what they do best. But Daisy wasn't digging randomly. Over time, she started focusing on one particular spot near the fence line in Walter's yard. At first, nobody paid much attention. People thought, oh, it's just a pig being a pig. But as days turned into weeks, the whole Daisy kept working and grew bigger and deeper. It went from a small patch of disturbed soil to something that looked like a mini excavation site. Neighbors walking by couldn't help but notice. At first, they chuckled about it, thinking it was quirky and harmless. But soon, opinions began to shift. One neighbor complained that the sight of a giant hole in someone's yard was ruining the aesthetic of the street. Another said it looked messy and unkempt. Before long, whispers spread through the community. Some even joked that maybe Walter was hiding something suspicious under the ground. The HOA caught wind of these murmurs and decided to step in. They sent polite notes to Walter at first, asking if he could please stop letting his pig dig up the yard. They suggested filling in the hole and maybe finding another hobby for Daisy. But Walter didn't respond. Or rather, he didn't change anything. Daisy kept digging, and the hole got bigger. Frustrated, the HOA tried again, this time with stronger language. Still, nothing happened. Walter seemed content to let Daisy do her thing. Finally, the HOA had enough. They called the cops. It wasn't every day that police officers showed up. because of a pig digging in someone's backyard, but here we were. On a sunny Saturday morning, 2 officers arrived at Walter's house, accompanied by a few members of the HOA board. The whole scene felt surreal. Neighbors peeked through their curtains, eager to see how this bizarre situation would play out. When Walter answered the door, he didn't seem surprised or upset. In fact, he greeted everyone warmly, inviting them to come inside and talk. The HOA representative launched into their spiel, explaining how Daisy's digging was causing problems, not just for Walter's property, but for the entire neighborhood. They argued that it was unsightly, disruptive, and against community guidelines. One officer, Chim's newest addition to the neighborhood, tacked on, saying that if Walter didn't comply, they might have to take further action. Walter listened patiently, nodding occasionally. Then, without saying a word, he led everyone outside, to the backyard. There, standing proudly beside her massive hole, was Daisy. Dirt clung to her snout, and her tail wagged lazily as if she knew she was the center of attention. Everyone gathered around the edge of the pit, staring down into its depths. "This is ridiculous," one of the officers muttered, shaking his head. "You really expect us to believe this is okay?" But Walter didn't argue. Instead, he crouched down beside Daisy and started brushing away loose soil from the edges of the hole. Then, with a calm confidence that silenced the crowd, he reached deep inside and pulled out something unexpected, a facet, small metal box covered in rust. The moment froze everyone in place. No one spoke. All eyes were glued to the mysterious object. In Walter's hands. What was it? How did it get there? And why had Daisy been digging for it? Little did anyone know, this discovery was about to turn the neighborhood upside down and change the way everyone saw Walter, Daisy, and even themselves.